interaction, and then it is something different.
We're live. We're live. Sorry to interrupt, but we're live.
Yeah.
Banu, we are live now?
Yes.
Okay. So welcome everyone to our fourth webinar in Upskilling series on the important topic of understanding master plans and bylaws. I'm Sheetal Bilkar, founder and director of UBAC, and I'm Naredco Mahi VP East, and also leading the skilling initiative for Mahi along with my team. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce our esteemed speaker for today's webinar, Architect Chitra Jain. With a multifaceted career spanning architecture, planning, and real estate, Chitra brings a wealth of expertise to the table. As a visiting faculty member at the prestigious School of Planning and Architecture SPA in Delhi, Chitra has inspired and mentored the next generation of architects and planners. In addition to her academic pursuits, Chitra is a director of Samyak Properties and Infrastructure Private Limited and serves as the Vice President Central of Naredco Mahi. Her research focuses on the role of participation in master plan preparation, highlighting her commitment to inclusive and collaborative urban planning. With extensive experience working on real estate projects, Chitra offers a unique perspective on the intersection of design, development, and community engagement. We are thrilled to have her here to share her insights and expertise with us today. So please join me in welcoming Architect Chitra Jain by putting a welcome message in the chat box. Please put welcome in the chat box, everyone. So without further ado, I would now request Chitra to start her session. Over to you, Chitra.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sheetal. That was such a beautiful introduction. And I am also equally thrilled to be here today and to share. Let me just get my presentation going. Yes. Okay. So, are you able to see the screen?
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Yes,
Yeah.
we can.
Right. So is this better?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Okay. So today's topic is, master plans and building bylaws and you. So basically, my presentation today is going to be as interactive as possible. So I will restrict my presentation to the first, say, 45 minutes to an hour, where I will be touching on these 4 key areas. So we all know a master plan for a city, of course, but why should you read a master plan and understand the master plan? And how does the master plan improve my city or your city? How does it make it better? What are the significant chapters from a real estate perspective? And how to use it to question the planning agency or other civic agencies to improve the quality of life in my city? So to me, as professionals or even as aware citizens, I think it is more important that we read the master plan of the cities where we live and practice, our work, than probably even the Constitution. So, and why is it important? So to me, a master plan is not just a statutory document, but it tells you, it holds a wealth of information about the city. So it traces the growth of the city from the first master plan whenever it was prepared. So this is a very general information. It could apply to any city in the country. So some cities, the plan would be called a master plan. In some cases, it could be a development plan. They could be calling it like a structure plan. It could be an outline development plan. So whatever it is called, primarily the purpose is to plan for a horizon period, varying it could be 15 years, it could be mostly it's 20-year period. And it plans for a holistic growth of the city. So why should we, again, coming back to my question, why should you read the master plan, first of all? So somebody who is not into construction, who is not into development, should they be also reading a master plan? To me, yes. Because it is, first of all, it tells you a lot of things about your city, beginning from the growth of the city, the historical perspective. It tells you how the city has grown over a period of, time. What is its population? It tells you the demography. It tells you the mix of socioeconomic aspects. It looks at literacy. It looks at migration. It looks at a whole lot of data. So this is really a treasure trove of a whole lot of data of the city. Not only from a population perspective, it also looks at land, it looks at infrastructure, it looks at growth potentials, it looks at connectivities, and it also looks at the city not in isolation, but in its regional and sub-regional perspective. So I think as, people who are in the real estate realm and in the sector, it is important for us also to see where the city is heading in the next 20 years. So how is the city getting influenced by the regional setting, and how does it also influence the regional setting? So this gives us an idea of what we can plan for, what is the potential in the city. So what are the new areas that one could look at from a real estate perspective? So we'll come more into detail in the next few slides. But we can also look at what does a master plan do to improve my city, or how does it make my city better? So does it really outline how the city, not only how the city is growing, but how the city can be a more healthier place, can have a better quality of living, and have better infrastructure standards? Yes, the master plan defines all these in various, in the form of bylaws, in the form of development controls. It also includes guidelines. It also includes mandates, and also the way of how the plan is to be implemented and how to monitor the plan, so that whatever has been planned is being carried out or implemented in the right fashion. So we'll also look at what are the significant chapters from a real estate perspective. And so I move on to next slide, where we discuss various kinds of plans. Is it enough that we understand what a master plan is? So a master plan typically talks at a much higher level, looking at the city as a unit. So usually the city is divided into several zones, and we have what is called zonal development plans, which gives us a little more in detail. So this is just one example I have taken from the master plan of Delhi. So Delhi is divided into 18 planning zones and 270 wards at the moment. So this is a zonal plan of zone zone F. Now this is zone F. This is the location of zone F in the city, and this is a zonal development plan. So the master plan shows the major land uses. So if you look at a master plan, it looks something like this. So this is the land use map of the master plan, so which is one of the most important documents for parts of the master plan. So typically you would find a master plan in all these colors, where yellow indicates residential, red indicates commercial, blue indicates public and semi-public uses, and various shades of green shows the open spaces. It could be regional parks, it could be green belts, it could be other city level open spaces. River is usually in a light shade of blue, and then it shows industrial areas in purple or violet. And it also shows the airport and other government lands. So this is typically for Delhi, but by and large, most city land use maps will look like this, except that in some cases, the blue and the red get interchanged. So in some cities, the commercial is shown in blue and public, semi-public in red, and in some it's vice versa. So now if you look at a zonal plan, the zonal plan is a little more in detail. So it shows what are the major, circulation corridors, the networks, the roads, arterial and subarterial roads. And now it gives a little more in detail at the zonal level of where are the open spaces and what are the other land uses. So the master plan in a lot of chapters would be discussing land uses. So to us as planners, land use map is one of the most crucial aspects of the master plan. So in the hierarchy of plans, so you have the master plan for the city, and then you have the zonal development plans, and then you have the layout plans or the local area plans. So some cities have local area plans, some don't, and they would be looking at layout level plans. We also have what are called perspective plans, which are mainly done for infrastructure. So you could have a perspective plan for electricity, you could have one for water supply, you could have one for waste management. So they will be discussing primarily focusing on that particular aspect of the infrastructure. So what is really a master plan? A master plan is a dynamic document. It's a planning document. It's a statutory document. It's usually prepared for a horizon period of 20 years, and it guides the development of the city. And we call it a dynamic plan, a dynamic document, because it is not just prepared once. Like we prepare a plan, a draft plan is prepared, and then you finalize it and you have a final master plan, let's say. So this document doesn't remain static for the horizon period of 20 years. It is amended periodically as and when it is required based on the ground reality. It could also be that some aspects have a scope of improvement, so which comes as a feedback. So the plan is assessed periodically and is amended accordingly. So it looks at a typical master plan and looks at the regional context first. So how does the city influence and is getting influenced in the regional context? What is its historical background? What are its growth potentials, corridors? What are the economic opportunities, environment potentials, constraints, land suitability, infrastructure availability? So a master plan discusses all these, and each of these chapters, or let us say each of these sectors, are not in isolation. So they are influenced by one another. So it is a complex document, and it takes a few years to prepare. So most cities are having a master document, which was the first document that was prepared, and periodically they are amended. And the next master plan, let's say in the case of Delhi, the first master plan was 1962. So that remains the master plan. So the next master plan, 2001, then 2021, and 2041, these are all amendments of the main master plan. So it's not that we have 4 master plans. We have one master plan, and which has been amended periodically every 20 years to serve for that horizon period. So typically a master plan preparation begins at least 4 to 5 years. Ideally, maybe even it should start much before that. So let's say at least 4 to 5 years before the horizon period ends. So this is the period when the document first looks at, the planning team looks at what is the baseline study, what is the existing scenario. So what was planned and what is the current existing scenario, from population to land use to infrastructure to transportation. So they look at all these aspects. So the preparation of a master plan takes about 4 to 5 years, beginning with preparing a draft master plan, which is then put out into the public domain for comments and suggestions and objections. Then the plan is then revised again, and then a final master plan is prepared. So currently in the last 10 odd years, let us say, there has been a lot more happening in the realm of participation in terms of citizens are being consulted more. And so their role in the preparation of the master plan is getting stronger. And since that's my area of research, so I have a lot more to share on that, but that's really not the focus of our discussion today. So we are understanding what the master plan really is all about. So it is prepared looking at the existing situation, looking at what are the future growth prospects, and through a land use planning and framing various regulations and guidelines. So that really forms the master plan. So what are building bylaws? So building bylaws again are legal tools. So they regulate the growth of the city, the built form of the city. Typically you have a city is composed of to put it in an urban design perspective, it is of built and unbuilt spaces. So how do you regulate the built spaces? So the built space is basically, it is regulated through the use of building bylaws. So the building bylaws really look at, the main aspects are, let us say, the floor area ratio or the FSI, floor space index, the height, the setbacks, the parking requirements, so the ground coverage. So these are basically the main elements that go to kind of guide the built form of the city. So, but in addition, the building bylaws also lists a whole lot of mandatory requirements, beginning from what is the size of a habitable room, what should be the minimum requirements for a habitable room, what is the minimum height for a habitable room, what is the minimum ventilation requirements, natural lighting requirements, what is the size of a toilet, if it is just a bathing area, what should be the size, if it is an integrated toilet, what is the size. So it gives a whole lot of its set of guidelines, but they are mandatory. So the minimum requirements have to be fulfilled in any building. So this is something which we cover when you're studying architecture. So by the time you are out designing, you are more or less familiar with a lot of things. But the building bylaws is a document you fall back on to check various things, like what is the size of a shaft? If the ventilation shaft is ventilating only a toilet, what is the size? If it is ventilating a kitchen, what is the size? If it's ventilating a habitable room, then what is the size? So it's a tome of information which has to be followed. It gives information on what is the size of the parking space, what is the size of height of a basement, what is the height for a stilt area, what is the height for, as I said, for various uses. So not only from residential, from commercial, for industrial. So you have a set of bylaws which covers practically all built spaces. So, and since it's a legal document, we have to fulfill the requirements that are listed in the bylaws. So now coming to what really is the master plan, what does it look like? So this is typically, I have taken it out of Delhi's 2021 master plan, but by and large, most city master plans would be having almost all these chapters, or maybe a few chapters lesser, could have combined a few chapters together. So it would begin with the regional, sub-regional framework, look at population and employment. So it looks at the, what is the design population? So what is the current population and what is the population growth going to be, and what should the city be planning for? So this is the second most important data, the first important data other than the regional, sub-regional framework. So the first important data that the master plan discusses would be population. So for example, in the case of Delhi, it started with, let's say, 53 lakhs, moved on to like 128 lakhs, and then to 220 lakhs. And then now the new master plan is looking at almost like 300 lakhs, like 3 crore population. So if you look at the different master plans, it traces the growth of the city in terms of its population. It also looks at employment. So in the case of employment, it looks at rates of migration. It looks at the workforce participation. It looks at male and female workforce. It looks at literacy level. It looks at the age of the population. So for example, the new master plan is looking at finding that Delhi would be having a higher percentage of 60 plus, population of that age group. So which means the future, in the next 20 years, there should be more focus on creating facilities, creating infrastructure for a population which is aging. So you could also have cities where you have got a very, very high, percentage of, say, youth and say maybe children. Cities where you have higher migration and migratory population, probably the male-female population ratio would be slightly skewed. So anyway, so I think I would suggest that everybody should read the master plan of their own city. So this chapter really talks about this. Then you would have what the urban area of the city is all about. So the various components of the urban area. Then would be shelter, which is talking about housing predominantly. So what is the housing requirement? What is the housing shortage? So what really needs to be planned for in the next horizon period? So what are the housing options? So at this stage, it also looks at what are the housing options for various income groups. And predominantly, most master plans will be looking at housing for the poor, because housing for the higher income groups is not so challenging as to be providing housing for the poor in the city. So typically, the affordable housing for EWS and LIG is what most master plans would be focusing. What are the kind of housing options they have got? Then would be trade and commerce, looking at various commercial areas, both retail, wholesale. Then industry, government offices. Then the focus would shift to environment, where you're looking at what are the various components that are going to be influencing the environment in the city. It could be open spaces, green, levels of pollution, and how to tackle them. Conservation of built heritage. So cities which have a very, very strong heritage value, or cities which are focusing more on the religious aspect. So cities which have tourism as their base. So there would be probably a larger chapter which is discussing those aspects. Then you have got urban design. So what are the various urban design concepts, and what are the urban design components in the city? Those would be also discussed. Coming to transportation would be what are the various circulation networks, what are the circulation corridors, what are the modes of transport. And recently now all cities are looking at public transport as the key to being more energy conscious, being more green, reducing your energy, and reducing your pollution, reducing congestion on roads. So this is a chapter which more or less would be common in most cities. Social and physical infrastructure, again, very, very important to really define our quality of life. So social infrastructure is looking at education, health, recreation. It looks at safety and security. It looks at religious buildings, etc. And coming to physical infrastructure, the main areas that would be looking at would be water supply, drainage, sewerage, electricity. And mixed use regulations. In the case of Delhi, mixed use was very important. So, and this came about in the third master plan, meaning the third amendment that happened. And then coming to land use map or land use plan, which is the spatial expression of what the city is going to be looking like. So this is a very, very important part of the master plan document. And the next important aspect is the development codes. So this is, again, as I said, it defines the built form of the city. And so whether your city is going to be low density, high density, or a mix of all the three in various parts of the city, and how open is the city going to be, or how dense is the city going to be. So all those aspects would be covered under the development code. Then plan review and monitoring. So it is not enough to just make a nice looking plan, but also how the plan has to be implemented, how it is to be reviewed, and how it is to be monitored. So this is another important aspect. And then would be land policies and various policies related to the growth in the city. In the case of Delhi 2021, there was a separate chapter on TOD, or the transit-oriented development. So this is predominantly, the main chapters that would be there. Regional framework, trade and commerce, environment, transportation, shelter, infrastructure, land use plan, and governance. So just to see how a city grows, let's say, if I look at Delhi's master plan of 1962, as I said, it was talking of a population of about 53 lakhs to be reached by 1981. So, people in Delhi would be able to relate to this, that Narela, Gurgaon, etc., all these concepts of ring towns were discussed in the first master plan. And it also looked at ring roads and radial pattern and rail linkages. So the ring roads in Delhi, which we are all very familiar with, the inner ring road, the outer ring road. So these were all planned in the first master plan. And Delhi's first master plan also discussed having an extensive amount of open space, which was the highest at that time of 20% in India. So the second master plan, so when you see how the population has now increased to 128 lakhs by the projected population, and then it also looked at mass transport systems. It looked at mixed use. It looked at the mixed use concept came in the second master plan or the second amendment. And the urban design policy was discussed more in detail. The heritage conservation, pedestrianization was again discussed in this master plan. When you come to 2021 master plan, this was the time when the vision of the city was to have a world-class city. So this really was the focus, and the entire master plan was prepared with that as the main vision. So now Delhi's master plan 2041, which is now still in the draft stage, and I hope it gets finalized and comes into the public domain soon. So this had a vision, and the vision document was very strong in the case of 2041. So there was enough time spent on actually preparing the vision document, which was prepared with the inputs coming from citizens, from experts, from the various urban local bodies. And so the first volume in Delhi's master plan, so I'm just coming to Delhi's 2041 master plan is in 2 volumes. The first volume discusses the vision and also outlines 6 sections covering environment, economy, that includes trade and commerce, wholesale, industry, etc., transport and mobility, heritage, culture and public spaces, shelter and social infrastructure, and physical infrastructure. The difference in this master plan from the 2021 master plan is the way the entire master plan has been structured. So coming from individual chapters, now here the 6 sections are actually in line with the vision for the city. So these are the 6 visions for the city, or the 6, let's say, the objectives. Prioritizing environmental sustainability. So if I go back now to the chapterization in this, so the first chapter on environment discusses this, being environmentally sustainable. So it looks at what are the aspects apart from the green spaces, what needs to be done in the case of built environments, and introducing green economies, urban farming, etc., was all discussed in the first section on environment. Facilitating economic development, how to promote clean economies, improve overall investment. So under the chapter on economy, so it covers trade and commerce, but also having the focus on, on how to promote a clean economy, enhancing heritage, culture, and public life. So Delhi, as we know, has a very, very strong, history, culture, heritage. So this is a chapter where it is not only looking at how to maintain, but also how to kind of make it more inclusive and have, heritage, culture, and public spaces all put together. So making the heritage spaces more viable and more maintainable is the focus over there. When it comes to transport and mobility, here it is looking at how to make transportation more green. So looking at a shift from using of private transport to a greater use of public transport and various modes of public transport. So the next section is looking at shelter and social infrastructure. So combining shelter and social infrastructure makes a lot of sense because we just cannot look at a residential area as just houses or just residences. So you need the support and you need adequate social infrastructure and physical infrastructure to make a residential area, have a higher quality of life over there. So it is not just looking at built areas in isolation, but looking at built areas along with the unbuilt, looking at social infrastructure and physical infrastructure put together. So the second volume discusses spatial development strategies and action plan. So this really is the section which is of, I think, a great deal of interest to the real estate sector. But I would say the first volume also is equally critical because then you understand the vision and you understand the various aspects that are working for the city and how that is also going to be influencing the spatial development strategy and the action plans. So it is looking at both green and brown field developments in the case of Delhi. So we have a whole section of city which has got housing or which has got areas which are over 50, 60 years old. And so that is, the quality of those structures are deteriorating. And so there is a great need for regeneration or rejuvenation of the city as such. So that forms one of the essential strategies in the spatial development strategy. So we are looking at, in this case, land pooling. We are looking at green development areas, regeneration, and looking at unplanned areas and transit-oriented development. So the key areas that Delhi's master plan is looking at is, one is environment, where it is looking at equitable distribution of open spaces and green spaces for all income groups and all parts of the city. So it is also looking at the levels of pollution, air, water, and noise pollution, and how to mitigate them, strategies to mitigate them. So this is essentially under the sector on environment. It's looking at urban mobility, as I explained, looking at a shift from private transport to public transport and how that can be strategized and streamlined. Water, and Delhi is again a water scarce city. So how can we rejuvenate our water bodies and how can we bring in water security is what this is another key sector. Critical resources, we're looking at power and waste management in this chapter over here. So Delhi generates a phenomenal amount of waste and is not being very well handled. So this is something which we keep reading every year. There is fire in one or the other landfill areas. We're trying to bring down the extent of landfill, but not really succeeding. Then housing, now to look at how to provide housing. There's always a housing shortage, and with high migration, though the statistics reveal that the rate of migration has been coming down, but still we do have a huge backlog of housing for the poor that has to be taken care of. So various affordable housing strategies and the role of private sector and private players in providing this essential housing for the poor. It also looks at built environment, public spaces, as I said, more from an urban design perspective, and heritage assets. And we know Delhi's vulnerability year on year. We have got, urban flooding happening. So this is something that the master plan is also looking at on how to address the vulnerability. And Delhi being in the seismic zone 4 is also, earthquake is something which we have to plan for and keep it always in the back of our mind. The economic potential that Delhi has got, not only being the capital city of the country, but also it is an education hub. It is a hub from health perspective. So from industry perspective as well. So there's a huge economic potential that Delhi can capitalize on. And monitoring and evaluation in the new master plan is a little more detailed and has identified key performance indicators that should be looked at periodically every 4 to 5 years. So coming to the next aspect of what are the key development controls, or let us say, which are the key aspects that we should be looking at apart from a good read of the entire document, is these are the key aspects that actually go to improve the quality of life in the city and influence the built form. So you've got density, you've got urban form, you've got parking, you've got safety, and all these put together go to also influence the quality of life. So when you look at density, so regulates the population density. So when you say density, we are looking at population density, we are looking at dwelling unit density. So both. So you will find that in some cases or in some cities, the master plan is looking or defining population density, in which case then you have to convert the population into number of households. So typically we have an average of about 4.5 persons per household as the household size. So from the population you can arrive at what is called the dwelling unit density. So this is then balanced along with the floor area ratio. So I'll come to that in the next few slides. So the urban form is dictated, as I said, by the floor area ratio, the building heights, the setbacks, and the land use zoning to maintain the city character or manage the sprawl, or you want to have a city which is more compact, or you want to have a city which is for an urban sprawl. So these are all then part of the master plan strategies. So parking, today parking, I think in every city, every urban area is a problem. So there are parking norms that are there to reduce congestion. So the new master plan in most cities are discussing multi-level, car parking, and also various other strategies to kind of control the use of private cars. So it could be congestion pricing, it could be, reduced parking standards so that you have no choice but to use public multi-level parking. So these are the various strategies that are discussed in the master plan. So safety. So basically, most of the building codes are looking at fire safety, earthquake resistant, disaster management. So we often get asked what is a master plan talking about in terms of development controls? What are these bylaws for? So why should why are setbacks required? Why is height to be restricted? Or if there is you can have as many floors as possible, then what are the other fire safety requirements that are to be fulfilled? So the fire safety norms are very, very stringent in our country. Wherever the norms are silent or not very well, set out in the master plan or in the development controls or in the bylaws, then we have a national building code which should be referred to, and the chapter on fire is very, very, as I said, stringent and has to be followed. So all these put together go to form the quality of life in addition to the availability of social infrastructure, physical infrastructure, green spaces, which are most visible to us and give the sense of feeling of a better quality of life. So let's look at what is this FAR that we are talking about and what is ground coverage. So floor area ratio is actually defined as the total built up area on all floors of the building divided by the plot area. So it's a very, very simple formula. So if you have a plot area of, say, 500 square meters and you have an FAR 2, that means you can build twice the plot size or plot area. So you can build 1,000 square meters. So the purpose of FAR is to control the density of development on a plot. So if there is no FAR, let us say, and anyone can build anything that they want, so you would have uncontrolled, development on a plot. So if you want to have a certain building density, if you want to have a certain build form, you want to have a good mix of open space to build area. So the FAR is the guiding aspect which controls this. And so what is ground coverage? The ground coverage refers to the percentage of the plot area that is covered by a building's footprint or the area that it occupies on the ground floor. So this is very simple, but there are various other aspects also which get added on, which when you read a master plan or the building bylaws, you would find that's also, there are various ways of calculating the ground coverage. So, but to put it very simply, the ground coverage is the percentage of the plot that is covered by the building at the ground floor. So sometimes there are several projections that are also to be taken into account in a ground coverage. But some projections are exempt from being counted for ground coverage. So those are discussed a little more in detail. I won't get into it. I think if you're interested, you can go back to the building bylaws or the master plan, and that would all be covered. So if you were to compare what is FAR and what is ground coverage. So FAR is concerned with the total construction area of all floors. So that impacts the total built up area and the total height of the building. The ground coverage, on the other hand, only discusses the area that it occupies on ground. So the ground coverage is what influences, or let us say controls, the amount of open space that is there in any project. So we often find advertisements which say, 110% green in a project. So how is that achievable? So if you have a ground coverage of, let us say, 30% or 20%, depending on, whether the building is one single tall tower or it's a cluster development or it's a plotted development, development. So the ground coverage and the FAR remaining constant, the ground coverage can keep varying. So the FAR influences the overall bulk and density of the building. And the ground coverage, on the other hand, determines how much of the plot is unbuilt. So that leaves space for landscaping, for parking, and other uses. So the FAR allows for taller buildings, more built space within the same plot area. And a lower ground coverage, on the other hand, ensures more open space and less crowded plot development. So the lower the ground coverage, you have better air circulation and better lighting, more area for landscaping, etc., more area for circulation and other facilities that are to be planned. So let's look at, I've just taken the example of, let's look at plotted housing. So typically you would find tables like this. This would be plotted housing and group housing, which are predominantly the two categories that we have in most master plans. So it would define what are the norms for, depending on the plot area, what is the maximum ground coverage, what is the maximum FAR that you can achieve, what is the maximum number of dwelling units, and what is the maximum height. So let's say you're looking at plotted housing of up to, say, 50, that's small. Let me take something in the middle. Let's say from 250 to 500 square meters is most predominantly the size of plots in most of the plotted colonies in Delhi. So we have a maximum coverage of 75 and an FAR of 225. So some cities like in Mumbai, you would be discussing FSI. So FSI is again put in the form of a ratio. So it is like a 1.33 or a 2.5. That means 2.5 times the plot area is what you can build. And in the case of Delhi, when we say 350 or when we say 225, again, it means the same thing. 2.25 times the plot area is what you can build. And what are the number of dwelling units? So dwelling units also, interestingly, it influences the built form and the population density in this case. If we do not restrict the number of dwelling units, for example, a builder decides to subdivide the floor plate, or let's say the floor plan into, instead of 2 dwelling units, decides to build 4 dwelling units. So you're going to have a higher population, so a higher requirement for water supply, a higher effluent from the plot, so higher energy requirements. So it directly influences the availability or the requirement for physical and social infrastructure. So which is why the number of dwelling units is also defined or restricted. The heights in this case, for example, 15 meters without stilt. So it allows you to build a G plus 4. You can have 17.5 with a stilt. So you will have a stilt plus 4 and subject to clearances from fire department. So if any building over 15 meters in height actually has to get a clearance from the fire department. So in the case of group housing, it is one static requirement. You have a minimum, ground coverage of 33.33 and you have, I think it is, of 200. And a minimum right of way of the road of 18 meters. So in the case of plotted development, they have not, at least this table is not discussing the width of the streets that is required, minimum width of streets. But there are other data that is also to be taken care of, where you are looking at, in some cities, in fact, the FAR is totally dependent on the width of the street from where you get the access to the plot. So as I said, this table could be a little different from city to city, but in the case of Delhi, this is what I have. In the case of Mumbai, I just took out one table which looks at an FAR of 1.33 to 2.5, 1.33 in the island city and 2.5 in the Mada buildings. So Calcutta is 1.5 to 2.5, Delhi is 1.2 to 3.5. So this was some kind of a compilation of FAR, FSI for different cities. So let's look at graphically. This makes it clearer. So if you have an FAR of, let's say, 1, and you have ground coverage, so building ground coverage of 25%. So this is the kind of form that you would get. 75% open space, 25% is where you build. So now if I can only build on 25% and I have an FAR of 1, which means I can build 4 floors. So if I have, let us say, my ground coverage is 50%, then I leave 50% open and I build on 50%. So I can build 2 floors. And if I have a ground coverage of 100, then I cover my entire site, no open space and I can build one full floor. So similarly, if I have an FAR or FSI of say 2 or a 200 FA, and I can only do 25% coverage, then my building is going to look more like a tower. With higher ground coverage, then my building becomes flatter and occupies the entire site. So these are other representations again graphically to show different types of developments that one can have. We can have plotted development. You can have a cluster court development like a group housing with a central open space. You could have a single tower with more open space and more area available for parking. So the choice is, it's actually designer's choice on doing a combination of all these three built forms. So this again is another graphical way of representing, a mix of FAR and ground coverage. So if you are looking at, let's say in this case, you have an FAR of 5. So you would have a tower which is going up like this, and you have built only on, let us say, 25% of your plots. Or you can do a mix of, like some floors are coming up till here, like you can bring, so you can play with the forms. So this is how you can actually, keeping the FAR and the ground coverage constant, you can have various built forms that you can play with. So looking at housing density. So density, as we discussed, you can do a dwelling unit density, you can look at population density and work backwards and come to a dwelling unit density or housing density as they call. So this is how you can relate density to built form. So if you have single family homes, so you would have typically, more open space, more green and lower density. So you have, let's say, mid density, you're looking at townhouses, so you're looking at row housing. And you're looking at apartments where it is more dense and you have a higher or a more dense built form or higher density. So what are setbacks? Setbacks again are, it's simply, just what it means. Like you're setting the building back and you're creating a setback. So your building is set back from the plot boundary. So typically we would have front, rear, side 1, side 2 setbacks. So in case you're doing row housing, you don't have side setbacks, you only have a front and rear setback. So in the case of Delhi, smaller plots, you don't need to leave any setbacks. Plots from 101 to 250, you've got minimum front setback and there are no rear and side setbacks. So because here we are looking at row housing. So if you're looking at a bungalow style housing, so you're looking at a larger plot size, you require a higher front setback and you also require a rear and side setbacks. So why do we need setbacks? So really setbacks are from a very technical perspective of giving adequate light and ventilation to a house. So the larger the plot, the larger is going to be your built up area. So how do you ensure adequate lighting and ventilation to your living areas? So it is by allowing to have or making it mandatory to have setbacks on all the 4 sides or maybe 3 sides, depending on what is the kind of housing. If you have twin housing or if you have row housing, then you only have front and rear setback. Then in which case you need also to have some kind of central courtyards to, bring in more light and ventilation. It is also from a safety perspective. It also looks at creating, open spaces for, creating more green areas and ensuring a more healthier environment, living environment. So in the case of, high-rise structures, if you're looking at group housing, there's a mandatory fire tender movement area that is to be left. So the setback area is defined and is also required from that perspective. So another important aspect that a master plan discusses is also what is the use that is permitted in a particular land use. Let us say you have a residential area. So what are the uses that are permitted in residential land use? So you could have, now this I've just taken out a table of use premises and its definition. So it says you could have group housing, you could have plotted housing, you could have studio apartments, dharamshalas, state bhavans, guest houses, affordable housing, slum rehabilitation, hostels, guest houses, foreign mission. So all these uses are permitted in what is called as a residential land. use. So similarly, you would have similar tables for what is allowed in a commercial area, what is allowed in an industrial area. So it could also be that in what is strictly a residential area, it is not just residential land use, but you would also have some other land uses that are, or building uses that are permitted. So let's say we are looking at a residential land use. So these are the other uses or other facilities that are permitted in a residential area. So in a residential, let us say, so these are the other defining, areas in a residential area: group housing, plotted, studio apartment, dharamshala, state or guest house, and affordable housing. So you can also have vertical mixing, which is a new concept which has come in the new master plan. So apart from the residential areas, it also allows for retail shops on the ground floor for a certain area like 20 square meters. It allows for mixed use activity. So again, now this table very clearly will tell you which use is allowed in which kind of housing. So if you're looking at, let's say, residential or retail shops, so retail shops are allowed in group housing, but they're not allowed in plotted housing. They're allowed in apartments, studio apartments. It's allowed in affordable housing. It's again not allowed in guest houses and state homes. Mixed use activity. A society office is permitted in all kinds of developments. A community room or a Basti Vikas Kendra or an Anganwadi, senior citizen recreation room, other recreation areas like a recreation hall, swimming pools, religious buildings. So these are not strictly residential, but they are all required to have an integrated residential area, which has basic requirements to have a good quality of life. So you would find similar tables for different kinds of uses. In a residential area, these are the uses that are permissible. So if I go to an industrial area, so I would find that even in an industrial area, I do still require retail shops. I do require places to eat. I also require some amount of housing. I would require other small offices. I would require recreational area. I would also require green spaces. So this chapter on use premises is an important part of the master plan. This defines, so for every area, any area that you're designing for, the first thing you also have to check is what are my permissible uses and what is not permitted, what is not allowed as per the mandate in the master plan. Okay, so Delhi's 2041, the chapter on spatial development policies, that's volume 7, is really an interesting chapter from a real estate perspective. So because this discusses what are the possibilities, what are the various kinds of developments that is being planned for and is envisaged for the next 20 years in Delhi. So we have development of new areas through land pooling. So this has been, discussed for over a decade, and we are still waiting for something more concrete to happen on the ground. So in the case of land pooling, so I will just say, okay, these are the 4 key, areas or key development strategies. Development through land pooling, development within green development areas or GDA, urban regeneration, and transit-oriented development. So the master plan in volume 2 discusses this in great detail. So land pooling is, we have been discussing, and we have had several workshops and conferences on land pooling, and including Naredco itself has organized several on land pooling. So I'm not going to go very deeply into it, but predominantly it discusses that, now Delhi's, DDA's role is no longer of, a development agency, but it is more as a facilitator role. So it is looking for private participation and the role of private real estate, developers and builders to be participating in developing Delhi. So land pooling is one of the, very, very ambitious strategies it came out with. So in this case, it's looking for 70% contiguous land is to be pooled for any area to be brought into a land pooling, project or land pooling, development. So this has been one of the, I would say, roadblocks. The second is that out of the area that is pooled, so I can pool in any amount of, land that I have got, the smallest of the parcels I can pool in. But out of which 60% of the land will be given back to me as developed land. 40% goes to DDA, has to be given free of charge to DDA for developing the social infrastructure and major road network. So this again has been a bit of an issue because people are not very sure that they will get the developed land in the same location as where they have they own the land at the moment. So there is some apprehension about that. So if you look at the distribution of land uses, so the 40% that DDA will take back would be used for putting in 4% into industrial, 16% into recreational, PSP, public, semi-public, and into roads and circulation. And the 60% that comes back to the developer would be having a gross residential of 53%, commercial 5%, and public, semi-public of 2%. So there has to be a developer entity who has to take ownership of the entire, land pooling project and develop it. So we are still waiting for a pilot project to come through. So I think let's move to the next development strategy, was the green development area. This has a great potential and is definitely a requirement for a city like Delhi, because we are still using the infrastructure that we had for the last several decades. And it is now, with the size of the city and with the population, there is need for new set of infrastructure, new set of public spaces that we require. So the green development area gives us that potential. So this looks at using green belt, the land along the boundary of Delhi, to a depth of 1 peripheral revenue village. So this has been declared as a green belt and for use under the green development area and low density residential area, or the LDRA. So villages which are notified as low density development and having a concentration of farmhouses. So these two areas come under the green development area. So this policy primarily is looking at fostering, green living, creating more green jobs, creating more areas for recreation, encouraging food, security, and would meet more horticulture needs, and also create a regional environmental buffer. Because Delhi really gets a lot of hot winds, a lot of dust coming in from, the desert in Rajasthan. So we really need this buffer for controlling, air pollution, controlling heat and desertification. So here they have discussed, in fact, they've divided the parcel of, based on the size of the parcel of land. If you have a land which is, minimum 600 square meters, you fall under grade 1, 4,000, grade 2, and up to 10,000 square meters and above, you're in grade 3.
Sorry, Chitra, I don't know about the others, but I can't hear you.
This is getting too technical. Hello?
Ma'am, you're audible.
I'm audible?
Hello?
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
Anybody
Archana said
else?
she can
I'm
hear.
not
Alright.
audible? Okay. So
No,
let me
you are
continue.
audible. Chitra, continue.
All right. Okay. So I think now, how are we doing on time? It's 5:30. So, okay, I'll quickly wrap it up. So now, if you see, it's fairly detailed out as looking at what is the minimum, access road. So, okay, I'm just going to go back. Excuse me. Road width again for us is very, very significant and important, because that not only is a requirement from safety perspective. So we have to ensure that the larger the land parcel, you need to have access from a wider road, because you're going to be bringing in that many more vehicles, and you also require it from fire safety perspective. So of course, the minimum road width from a fire safety perspective is 6 meters. But the larger the development of plot, so we need to have a higher road width. So the minimum access road, that is why for a 600 square meter plot, it says 6 meters, it increases to 12, and it increases to 30 in the case of grade 3. So green rating is also made mandatory. And what is interesting from a real estate perspective is the activities that are permitted. So if we look at, a 1 hectare plot, so it allows us to come in with new campuses for education, new work centers, research and development areas, agro-processing, cold storage, greenhouses, convention and exhibition centers, concert spaces, and other public, congregation spaces, museums, art galleries, amusement parks. So today, really speaking, where in Delhi would we build an amusement park? Where in Delhi would we have a new museum or an a space for youth to meet, or a space for children to meet, or a space for senior citizens to meet. So we need to create all these new facilities and new infrastructure. So this is a big potential from a real estate perspective. So of course, it has got its own development controls, so we won't get into that. So this again is another big potential for real estate developers and developments, is looking at reconstruction at plot level. So the third aspect under the third strategy was urban regeneration policy. So, DDA agrees that a large part of our existing housing is all deteriorating or will deteriorate in the next 20 years. So we are looking at regenerating, at plot level. So the reconstruction could be at plot level, which is what happens, which we're all familiar with. Single, dwelling units brought down, and you have a still +4 in its place. Regeneration plans are for a much larger area. We have strategic regeneration, which could be pick up one particular specific area and have a separate strategy for that regeneration. Integration of the undeveloped private land parcels, regeneration of unplanned areas. This is a big game changer, but we still don't know how it is going to pan out. So we are looking at, when you say unplanned areas, we're typically looking at slums and unauthorized colonies. So, in situ rehabilitation schemes for slums and regeneration of urban, for unauthorized colonies. So we have a massive 1,726 unauthorized colonies, which recently were regularized, but with very low levels of social infrastructure, lacking access, lacking physical infrastructure as well. Social infrastructure, as I mentioned, fire safety is another big issue, haphazard growth and development, lack of parking. So most of the unauthorized colonies really should be replanned, and there are now strategies which is being put into place in the master plan. And then regeneration of unplanned industrial areas. So again, we have large, parcels of industrial land which are up for redevelopment. So these are, have a great potential from, converting them into residential land use or a mix of residential and commercial land use. So post-COVID, I think the kind of, the outlook towards planning has also changed, and we're looking at doing more integrated kind of planning, where one doesn't have to go too far to access not only daily needs, but let's say your weekly needs and monthly needs. And typically you should have a very self-contained kind of development in, say, a 15 to 20-minute walking distance. So let's see again how that pans out. So TOD again is another old policy we've been discussing, and again yet to really take off in Delhi. So this as a concept is really good, because a TOD is a transit-oriented development. So you're orienting your growth and development, along your transit corridors. So it makes a lot of sense, because then you are reducing your travel time, you are reducing your travel cost and energy requirements, and you can bring in a more dense development or increase the density of development along your transit corridors. It could be metro lines, it could be local, maybe train networks. It could also be ring roads and other higher order, circulation network. So this will result in an optimized density and diversification of users, enhance your mobility, improve public realm. It makes the city more safer for women and children, especially if you're traveling along corridors where there's high density and there is a lot of movement and users stretching on, not only from, you don't have office spaces which typically close down, say, by about 6 or 7, but you would have multitude of users. So you would have these spaces which will literally be functioning almost like a 24-hour. So makes it more safer, and the multimodal integration is also possible. Yeah, so this is as far as my presentation goes. So I'm going to come back to,
So Chitra, we have a few questions.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to see, it's all in the chat, right?
Yeah. So you want me to read it out to you?
So I'm Just scrolling. Welcome, welcome,
Yeah.
welcome. Don't see too many questions. I'm saying please type your questions in the chat box. Why do our cities fail in terms of infrastructure, services, land use, and public-private space? Well, very interesting question, Archana. Yeah, unfortunately, though I painted a very, very nice picture about a master plan. Master plans are very nicely made documents, first of all. So, in fact, the new master plan in Delhi has been criticized as being a feel-good document by several people. Many professionals also criticize the master plan as being it's a feel-good document. It's a very beautifully written document. But unless whatever is outlined in the master plan has to be translated into action, and that translation is to be done not by the not so much by the planning authority as such. Yes, they have a role, but it is down the line you have various agencies and civic agencies and authorities which have to provide the infrastructure, which have to ensure that whatever has been outlined in the master plan is actually translated on ground. So to give you an example, we might be discussing let's say water supply at the rate of say 135 LPCT, liters per capita per day, is outlined, let us say, in the master plan. It's also there in the National Building Code. But if your civic authority, the agency which has to supply you water supply, is not able to arrange for that water supply, then it is not the problem with the master plan. It is the problem of the civic agency which was initially consulted during the preparation of the master plan. So the agency knew that it has to arrange for. So that is the time it flags and says that, hey, listen, I cannot provide you so much water supply for this population. So this is the need, and I have to augment my water supply to reach this level when the population reaches its maximum population in 20 years' time. So that's a call, and that is something which the civic authority or the agency has to arrange for. The same thing could be waste management. It could be transportation. So whichever sector you take, it could be housing. We all criticize, all our planning authorities saying that none of the master plan guidelines are being followed. None of the master plan, what has been outlined as the required housing or required infrastructure get satisfied at the end of the planning period. Why does that happen? So because it is not just one agency, it is a multitude of agencies which have to work together for a city to function. So it is one agency giving water supply, one getting electricity, one taking care of waste management, one developing land, one giving infrastructure, one giving transportation, one building housing. So all of them have to do their part, and that is when everything in the city will work. So, but when they do not do their, let's say they do not do their part, so then it is not the failure of the master plan. It is the failure of the other agencies which are there. So, unfortunately, we need to have that kind of a monitoring, a strong monitoring agency, which is what is lacking in most cities. And that is why when we say that, why are we failing in our infrastructure, in our services, land use, public, private, open spaces? It's all outlined in the master plan, but yet it is not manifesting on the ground. And that is where I actually want to also sensitize, I think, all citizens that, hey, here is a document. This is a statutory document that is there. So if something is not getting fulfilled, we as citizens have to do our part in pulling up the agencies. Why are we not holding them accountable? We should be asking them these hard, tough questions, take them to court. So I was just telling Sheetal this afternoon, I said, why is it important that all of us have to become more aware citizens and read our master plan? Is because everything is there, outlined in the master plan. It's all beautifully written. And why should it just be a document? It has to be translated on the ground. So we had one, Viren Khanna, we had one person from an NGO in Delhi who took the entire DDA, including till the LG, to task for chopping trees for a development. That is the power that we have, and that is the power that the master plan gives us, in fact. So if why cities fail is because it is not just the document is not enough. Like you write something, it does not automatically guarantee that it gets translated on the ground. So it is all these multitude of agencies and organizations. Plus, we are also looking at finance. It's all very nice to say that I want 20%, organized open space. Now, who is going to develop it? Where is the money coming from? So all these also have to be detailed out further and arranged for. So that is where it is not just the city, it is also the city, the state government, it is also the central government. So now you see that a city functions or does not function is not just one agency to be held at fault, but it is also the entire system. I hope that answers your question, Archana. So okay, Anita, why is there a huge gap between the FAR and the infra? I'm sorry. Can we have Anita's mic switched on? I would like to understand what she means by FAR and the infra.
Bhanvi, please allow Anita
Okay,
to.
can I take Archana's question and if we can have Archana's mic on? What is your opinion or views on Chandigarh master plan? Where do you think it succeeded and where can it be improved? Any master plan that has been planned and implemented well? Yeah, okay. So Chandigarh, as we all know, is a planned city. So it started from scratch on virgin land and it was planned and developed. So that is, that is where the success of Chandigarh really is. And there are also other cities, I think New Raigad, and then we have got Gandhinagar. So these are other cities which were also planned and so are more successful. And so is there, in my opinion, that has been planned and well implemented? Well, again, all these planned cities have been implemented well. They've been planned and implemented well. So Amravati was also being planned and was in the process of being implemented and stopped midway for, obvious reasons that we all know what happened. But I would be more interested in cities which are not really planned. So we all started, most of our cities started as an unplanned, organic city or organic core city, and then the city has further, grown. So it is more challenging, in fact, to manage a city which was not planned from scratch. And that is where most of our 99% of our cities would fall in that category of, not really planning from scratch. So that is where, it's a bigger challenge to me. And as a planner and as an architect or as real estate, professionals, I think we should be looking more at cities which did not really get planned, but today have a master plan and are struggling maybe to, to move towards a more planned, kind of development. And coming to Anita's question, I don't know whether the question was incomplete. Why is there a huge gap between FAR and the infra? So, Anita, can you let me know what is this infra that you're talking about?
Ma'am, she said that her question was answered and it was similar to Ma'am Archana.
Archana's. Oh, okay, fine. Yeah, so as I said, I mean, these are all different aspects, but they all mesh together. So you cannot look at only FAR in isolation. You can't look at setback in isolation, ground coverage in isolation, infrastructure in isolation. So a housing area or, I mean, a good residential area requires all these: circulation, infrastructure, physical, social. It requires good development controls. It requires open spaces, religious, and it also has to satisfy the requirements of various age groups. So, just to share something very interesting, I was part of the citizen engagement and participation that happened prior to making of the draft master plan. So there were consultations from different, groups. So of course, residential areas, RWAs, MTAs, market and traders associations, industries, real estate groups. So all these are very obvious, groups with whom one would discuss. But there were also, specific groups. For example, youth was invited very specifically to discuss what are their expectations out of a master plan. What do they want? So they were looking at, a higher level of mobility, higher safety. They wanted spaces which were open through the night so that, they work through the day. So they wanted that they could go chill out in, spaces which are open, which are safe, which are connected by public transport, which are accessible to all. And it gives them opportunities like, they are looking for spaces which are, let us say, multi-use, or they have flexibility in use. So it could be a place where they can work, they can also entertain themselves, they eat, they interact, they can relax. So those were the kind of spaces. And they were also looking at housing options that are more affordable for them, which are, again, with high degree of safety, with good infrastructure, where they can not only work, they can relax, they can, interact. Social interaction was also very, very important. So then there were also interactions with, women who were into home-based industries, let us say, or home-based activities. So they had their own set of requirements that they wanted. There were persons with special requirements. So they were looking at city has to be accessible. And unfortunately, there were so many parts of the city, major parts of cities were not accessible to them. Most of the public conveniences were not accessible. Getting onto public transport was a problem. Just even moving on a platform or a footpath was a major challenge. So these kind of uses, so there were a lot of views that came in from different, groups, and all of them were listened and, kind of considered in the master plan. So master plan really is very complex and so interesting. So I really hope that all of you read your city's master plan. And to us, really, Delhi's master plan was a very, very highly referred to document. 2021 was a, very well written document. With hierarchy in a lot of, our chapters, beginning with not only land. So it was like housing, and I'm sure all housing and architecture professionals would know this. Housing area typically is like a 5,000 population. Then you've got a neighborhood level, which is like a 10,000 population. Then you come to community level, which is 1 lakh population. Then you go to a district. Then you go to a city level. So our infrastructure is also planned based on that. So we've got housing area level open space. So you've got a convenience shopping, which is for a 5,000 population. So you've got a nursery school, which is required for 5,000 population. So you might need 2 nursery schools. So when you go to the next level of population, you require secondary school. Then you require a high school. So you require even open space. Or also there's a hierarchy in social infrastructure, starting from a dispensary to a, specialized hospital. You've got from a nursery school to a university. You've got open spaces from a tot lot or from a little park to a city level open space. So there is a neat hierarchy which was there in Delhi's master plan. And I know a lot of cities, tier 1, tier 2 cities were referring to Delhi's master plan also. So what's the other question?
Chitra, you can take 1 or 2 questions more, because
when is master plan 2041 coming? Yes, I am also very keen to know that. Well, the draft master plan is what I've been referring to so far, but I was told that probably it was to be taken up in the first agenda for the first 100 days. So hoping that in which case it should be September 15th, but we are not hearing anything at all on the master plan. So I am a bit skeptical now. My question similar to Archana's. Which master plan that you've designed or you've been a part of that you'd like to talk about? Well, to tell you very honestly, Archana, I have not been part of a master plan from beginning to the end. But yes, I have been associated with 2041 to a large extent before the draft master plan was in place. And as a visiting faculty, for the last 20 odd years, I have been doing some kind of plan at an academic level with the students. So SPA, in fact, gets real-time projects from several cities and towns for planning. So we often take those as our, studio exercises. So we do, an exercise similar to a master plan, but done in a semester. So it doesn't extend for these 2 to 4 years, but we quickly gather information and we do what is called an outline development plan, which is a more, I would say, not as detailed as the master plan is, but it covers all the various aspects of the master plan. So I hope that answers the question. Was there any discussion on privately owned public spaces as a concept? We see this in other countries. Yeah, yes, Charu, that's very interesting. In fact, this is something which, we were also suggesting from the citizens' perspective, that why should, public spaces, or let's say, should only be owned by the government agencies. Like I have seen in New York, it could be just a very small little, parcel of land, which is beautifully landscaped, which is open to public. So in lieu of that space, they are then given, a TDR or a transferable development rights to develop land or develop another parcel of land in a different place. So if they give up their parcel of land, especially this is useful in spaces which lack open spaces. It could be old city, it could be parts of, areas which are under, for example, large parcels of East Delhi are severely lacking in open spaces. Large parcels of parts of the, heritage city in Delhi, so, Shahjahanabad also has, very, very dense development and hardly any open space. So, but if there were small parcels of land, people are willing to give it up for a public, open space in lieu of getting land elsewhere in an area of their choice, or if there are land parcels which they say that these are the receiving areas. So they could receive, these development that's, in lieu of the land that they give up, they can then get maybe twice the land, or maybe thrice the land that they've given up, or they get a higher FAR. So it makes it more, lucrative for them to actually give up that parcel of land in the interest of, a more public interest, let us say. So this is something very interesting, and we did suggest, and we said, please include it in the master plan. Let's see if it comes out in the final master plan. I'm not sure. If any builder can change master plan, what was process to follow? Well, you really cannot change the master plan. What you can do is, if you have a land use and you want to change the land use. So this frequently even the development authorities do. So there could be parcels of land which they own and which could be coming under, let us say, a residential land use, or they want to change from a residential land use to a commercial land use, or from an industrial land use to a commercial land use, or from what is earmarked as agricultural land use to a residential land use. So there is a process that is to be followed. So you have to apply for a change in land use. So that is then to be also published in the Gazette, and they look for any objections and suggestions, or any objections that really come from any citizen can raise an objection on that. And if it is a valid, objection, then they have to answer the objection and then carry forward. So this happens. There are a lot of Gazette notifications, even in newspapers, that you would see change in land use of a small parcel of land somewhere, which is under a certain land use, gets changed. And this happens all the time, and it's done in most cities. How is the old city and new city integrated in master plan? How does one upgrade old city retaining its identity? See, usually if you have a city which has got a high heritage value, let us say, so then in the interest of that heritage value, the old city identity is retained, and strategies to maintain that, identity is also outlined in the master plan. For example, in the case of Delhi, Shahjahanabad, not only Shahjahanabad, even Karol Bagh is then identified as a special area, because that was one of the oldest of the areas in the city. So it has its own special character. Shahjahanabad has its own character. So the idea is to retain the character, not to actually change it and apply the same set of development controls and norms to the whole part of the city. So how to retain the heritage value? So there is usually a separate chapter on heritage, and it is there in Delhi as well. So to maintain the heritage, so which are the areas, which are the streets where there are some elevation controls are there. There are some uses that are permitted, which are not permitted. They're trying to shift out, let us say, wholesale activity out of the old city and shift it more to the periphery of the city and create more spaces for, interaction, create more spaces, public spaces, bring in more people, bring in more tourists. So all these are done. For example, now they have pedestrianized Chandni Chowk. Chandni Chowk was at one time, so difficult to navigate, and a street where most people would avoid going there if they can do it. So it is exciting for a tourist to come and see Chandni Chowk, but most of the locals would avoid going to Chandni Chowk because it's so crowded. There's no parking space. Most of the time, it was even difficult to just walk on the, on the footpath. So now the situation is different. So today, if you go to Chandni Chowk, it's totally different. It's totally pedestrianized, and they only allowed NMTs to be operating. So it's either e-rickshaws or it is just the manual, rickshaws which are allowed in Chandni Chowk to operate. So they have given separate timings for, wholesale activity, which means loading, unloading activities have specific times which do not clash with the, movement of pedestrians on the street. They have removed most of the vendors have been kind of either relocated or the unauthorized ones have been removed. So some structures like temples have been retained. So they've tried to create some public conveniences, which I'm told, I got a feedback that it's not enough. So Chandni Chowk has, a lot of heritage, not only heritage buildings, it's got temples, it's got the Gurudwara, it has got, it leads down straight onto a mosque. It's got several eating joints. So old shops which are there, people from various, smaller towns and cities around Delhi come to Chandni Chowk to shop. So that character was something which they did not want to change. So that still continues. So there are various katras and which have, you've got the Maliwada and then you've got the Kinari Bazaar, which deals only with, decorative things that, one wants. There are lanes which only sell fabric. There are lanes which sell only jewelry. So that was the old character of the city, and that's still being maintained. So, and how do you integrate the old city and the new city? Well, one is the spatial integration is one, but there are also other, ways that you need to integrate the old and the new city on a socio-economic, level. You also need to integrate them from transportation levels. So we have, very, very strong, public transport and, network. You can access Chandni Chowk by metro. So we have a very, very deep metro line which is traveling. So none of the old structures were disturbed. So there was a very, very deep digging which happened and tunneling, and the metro station is right there inside of, just on the boundary of Chandni Chowk. So integrating not only, from, as I said, from a spatial perspective, but also at all these various levels. So we need the old city, we need the new city, and they need each other. So they retain their identities, and that's the charm of, I think, any city.
Chitra, we are running out of time.
You're running out of time. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think I'll just quickly see if there is anything that what difference between bylaws with respect to firefighting equipment and other norms. So the height of the building changes from 15 to 18 meters. Well, in the case of Delhi, they've said if your building height goes to 17.5, especially if you're talking of a stilt plus 4, they're still maintaining the same fire norms. So you do not need a separate set of fire norms, but if it goes beyond 17.5, yes, you need to follow the fire safety requirements. Yeah, so I think we have kind of done with all the questions. Sheetal, over to you.
Over to Charu for vote of thanks.
Yeah, I hope it was interesting and didn't get too technical. And I'm sure I try to keep it as broad as possible, but anything more, like, for example, one can do a separate session just on land pooling, one can just do a separate session on TOD, but they would then get really, really technical. So if we need a technical session, we can take it up sometime much later.
So Chitra, I think I speak on behalf of everyone who attended and on behalf of Naredco Mahi and this skilling initiative. Thank you very much. It was a great session. I loved it. I think we could have bifurcated it into two, city master plan and bylaws. because they're both topics in themselves that we can speak about a lot. Your extensive knowledge and, the clear explanation on some of these critical aspects that you provided us, and, your deep understanding is very visible. The depth of your expertise and your ability to convey the complex concepts was extremely commendable. I really enjoyed the session. I also love the fact that you've encouraged us to be responsible citizens and, read our own master plans and query the planning authorities, right? I don't think we take that responsibility seriously enough. So really appreciate the time and effort you've invested in preparing and delivering this session, which has undoubtedly enriched my development at least. So I would like to thank you for your invaluable contribution today.
Thank you.
Enjoyed the session completely, and I look forward to many more sessions from your side, given your depth. I think perhaps next time we can talk about another city, another state, and talk a little bit about that in depth. I completely enjoyed it. I think some people have requested for an email of the presentation. If you're okay with it, we request the Mahi Secretariat to send it to them. So once again, thank you, and we look forward to an opportunity to learn from you in future endeavors. Thank you so much, Chitra. I really enjoyed the session.
Thank you.
From all
Thank
of
you
us.
so much. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.